Well, my body lies over the ocean. My body lies over the sea. Ooh, my body lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my body to me. Bring back.
This is Travis Allison from capehacker.org. I'm excited to be here today with Scott Arizala and my co-host on the Scott Arizala Show. Hey Scott, how's it going?
Good, Travis. How you doing? Thanks for having me once again. I am super excited about this particular episode. We have in writing a lot of the content for a lot of these episodes, it became really clear that there needs to be sort of series of shows that deal with some of the some similar topics. This is going to be our kickoff episode for our leadership series. And in thinking through what I wanted to talk about, there were sort of a group of essential leadership skills that I wanted to share with you. Where this came from was a couple summers ago. I had a moment at camp that sort of shone the light on what leadership development and what being sort of good at our jobs as being a camp director was really all about. At my camp, I'm the guy I'm like the homesick guy and the extreme behavior guy. You know, if something like that is going on, pretty much it's like call Scott, you know, straight away, and he'll come and help you deal with it. I mean, it's one of my those are some of my very favorite contexts at camp, to be working with kids. And I know it sounds a little crazy because that's oftentimes where kids are having the hardest time. But it's that space that I find myself in where I'm really sort of enjoying, I'm feeling challenged by the work, and I'm really enjoying the interaction. So at any rate, a couple summers ago, we had a camper who was really homesick. It was the first day of camp. This was also during my autism session, and he wasn't sort of 100% verbal. I mean, he had some verbal skills, but he was for the most part nonverbal. And so, this was like really classic homesickness, and it was sort of being translated almost through the sort of lens of autism, which made it, sort of even more challenging to sort of, interact and have a meaningful conversation about what was going on and so on and so forth. At any rate, I get up there, the unit had called me on the walkie-talkie, and they were having this big issue, and so I came and I started hanging out with this kid and really trying to talk to him, and I'll be really honest right now and tell you that sort of every single tried and true technique that I used that evening fell flat. I mean, nothing quote unquote worked, right? That's what we hear from our counselors all the time. I've tried everything, nothing worked. And here I was, the camp director, tried everything and nothing worked. And it was like definitely one of those, really tough moments. And I must have spent 45 minutes in there with him, and we ended up sort of playing with some of the Play-Doh and just like doing a couple things literally just next to each other. And finally, I don't know, about 45 minutes into it, he pointed at his picture schedule and basically pointed to pajamas, and I was like, do you want to put your pajamas on? And he said yes, so he put his pajamas on, and he pointed to the bed, and I was like, are you tired? Do you want to go to sleep? He said yes, and he got right in his bed and went to sleep. I mean, literally is like that. He just like turned off the homesick feelings, got his pajamas on, and went to bed. Well, I go out into the hallway, and there's a bunch of staff kind of out there kind of paying attention to what I was doing, and the first thing I hear from a bunch of the staff members was, oh my gosh, you're so good at this, and da-da-da-da. Of course, in that moment, I was like, well, sure, yeah, I've been doing it for a long time, and whatever, and I walked away, and I get halfway down the hallway, and I'm saying, I just literally stop, and I say to myself, like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I am such a faker, it's ridiculous. Right? All I did was go in there and just like hang out with that kid until he was like done with it. That to me was like the moment that I really started thinking clearly about like what like leadership really is, because we teach leadership in a completely different way. We teach it like, here are a bunch of things to do, here are a bunch of skills, here's situations, you do step 1, step 2, step 3. I mean, these are all sort of like leadership ideas that we train on, and we want people to get better at. the way it looks on the ground is so different, right? I mean, the way it looks is that, you know, people take sort of the experiences that they have, you know, and a certain skill set that they may have, and they sort of bring them together into this one space of, I'm dealing with you in this particular situation. So it's like, how many times have I dealt with a kid being homesickness and then, or being homesick, and then sort of like, well, what kind of worked, and, you know, how would I talk to him and whatever, how can I sort of bring those together into sort of an innovative, creative space right now with this one particular kid. And so it got me thinking about like essential skills that go into this, and you know, why I was maybe successful in that one particular moment, but just across the board, and what do I think other folks need to be or do to really be successful leaders. And you know, there's a bunch of stuff that goes into leadership, and there are just 5 that I kind of wanted to talk about today that I thought were really you know, really important. And they are accessibility, approachability, really solid communication, good communication skills, what I like to call staying involved, or some people call it team play or teamwork, as well as delegating real responsibility. So I thought, Travis, you and I could spend some time talking about, you know, those 5 concepts and those 5 ideas.
Well, that's great. There are so many good things that I want to hear your perspective on, Scott. So why don't you start us off with what you mean by being accessible?
Accessible is really, in my opinion, like, do they know where you're at? Can they find you? You know, there's a sort of very physical nature to accessibility. A lot of us at camps use walkie-talkies and use radios. Obviously, I see that as like an accessibility tool, not really a communication tool, more of an accessibility tool. I've seen camps where the camp director puts a big wheel on their office door, and it says, you know, archery or swimming or wherever. Like, where's Scott now? Might have even been you, Travis, that told me that when you were a camp director, you used to have office hours, quote unquote office hours. I don't know if you called it office hours, but you always, correct me if I'm wrong if this wasn't you, but you always hung out at the flagpole during a certain time. All your staff knew where to find you. I mean, it's those kinds of ideas that create really good accessibility, right? Not only, you know, sort of where to look for you and all that, but of course when they find you, that you make time to talk to them, or you follow up later with them.
Yeah, it was me. We used to set aside time that we would be accessible not just to the staff, but to the campers as well.
Yeah, no, it's that camper piece too that I think is so cool, so crucial. And that actually is a great segue into approachability, because I think one of the biggest parts of approachability is this idea of how people feel about finding you, right? How do they feel about complaining to you? How do they feel about telling you something? How do they feel about sharing something really great that happened with you? I mean, there's a sort of an emotional aspect to approachability. Hanging out with campers, being with campers is one of the common denominators at camp, and they see you hanging out with kids, your comfortability with kids, you're sitting at the flagpole and being able to, you know, shoot the breeze with campers or play a game or whatever. That's a huge piece to how they feel about coming to you. And you know, the reality is, at the end of the day, if they know where to look for you, or they know where to find you, and they feel pretty good about telling you stuff, I mean, their job is easier. You know, some huge ideas that go into approachability really is about, like, how do you react to things? I'll share another quick story with you. I had a camp director call me and tell me that there was a lot of drama at her camp, and she wanted me to come and do some work with them on sort of ratcheting down, minimizing the drama. And you know, the first thing I thought is, you know, drama at camp, geez, you know, that's new. But so I was like, all right, whatever, you know, I'll come to this camp and I'll try and work with it. Sure enough, man, I get there and like the drama is sky high. I mean, you know, in the first like 45 minutes I was there, I was being told all kinds of like stuff that I probably shouldn't know. At any rate, so I'm like, okay, I see what she's getting at. I wasn't there more than a couple hours before it was a meal time. It was lunch or dinner or something. We walked in. There's no campers here at the time, by the way. This is still in their staff training. And they had been doing something in the dining hall where all the tables are spread out, and there's not 60 or 70 people in the dining hall. And we all kind of come in, and I'm standing next to the camp director, and she in just like a regular kind of talking voice, she says, "Okay, folks, will you get all the tables together?" And nobody moved. I mean, everyone was sort of milling about. This is a huge dining hall, 70 people. They're all having their own conversations. Nobody even heard her. So she says it again. "Okay, can we move the tables so that, you know, we can set up for the meal and blah, blah, blah." Again, nobody responded. She screamed, started crying, and ran out of the dining hall. You know, and everyone sort of like turns and like stares at me, you know, because I was the one standing next to her, and the whole dining hall's quiet, and I said something like, I think she wanted you to get the tables sorted out. And so I like go and find her, and she's, you know, crying. She's talking about how nobody ever listens to her and all this kind of stuff, and I had to be like, "Look, you know, nobody, I don't think anybody heard you." And, you know, I'm thinking in my mind, you know, like, no wonder there's all kind of crazy drama at this camp, right? I mean, it's clearly being role modeled from the top down. Could you imagine what it would be like if that's her reaction when people aren't listening to her as far as sorting out the tables in the dining hall? Can you imagine what it would be like to go to her if there was an issue with a camper or an issue with a staff member or so on and so forth? So, point being is that part of this feeling of approachability, how I feel about coming to you, is about your reaction. I think in an episode earlier, Travis, we were talking about how I have a friend in Minnesota who always asks herself, you know, when a staff member comes to her, always asks herself, you know, is there blood or is there fire? And if the answer is no, she takes a really calm approach. That is a great technique for thinking about approachability. Like, okay, what needs to happen? I think the other piece that's not as intuitive about approachability, because it also fits in a little bit to accessibility, is really this idea of sort of follow-up or follow-through. People feel better about coming to find you and telling you something if whatever's actionable in the conversation, if something actually happens based on that piece. And what I mean is this. Not always do staff members need you to do something about it, right? Sometimes they do, but not always. In fact, some of the best leaders know when to sort of ask this question of like, "Hey man, do you need me to like take my camp director hat off and put my Scott hat back on and just like, do we just need to kick it for a minute and you just need to like yell and scream and then you're going to be able to like put your happy face on and go back out there? Or is this the kind of thing you want me to keep my camp director hat on and we need to do something about it? There's some sort of action related to this." Those things need following up with. You need to do something differently because of that conversation. That first one, you might not necessarily need to do something about. You don't need to go have a different conversation or change the way we're doing something or whatever. The follow-up there, the best leaders would be able to go back to that person and say, "Hey, you know that conversation we had yesterday or 2 days ago or 3 days ago? How's that going? How are you feeling about it?" So on and so forth. That's the follow-up that I think those kind of comments and those kind of situations, all those things sort of encompass this idea of being really approachable and what it feels like to be able to come to you with those kinds of ideas and challenges.
3 Adventures International Camp Staff.
3 things you should know about 3 Adventures. 1. Our owners are all former camp directors. 2. We're a high-quality company that's easy on your budget. 3. Background checks. Our international camp staff come from all over the world, and every one of them has had a background check. No exceptions, no excuses. 3adventures.com, the site to get great camps connected with great staff.
That's great. There's a note you wrote here, Scott, about speed. Do you know what that was for?
It's real easy as far as I'm concerned. All camp people, camp directors, all of us, we all need to slow down. We all need to slow down. We operate just, the speed at which we all operate is like breathtaking and kind of ridiculous. You know, the fact of the matter is a lot of camp directors, and I've literally seen this hundreds of times. You know, you all walk around camp, you're the most intense people on the planet. You're walking fast, you're gripping things, your knuckles are all white, you know, your face is clenched, because 9 times out of 10, you're like going somewhere like with purpose. You know, and at camp we only have 24 hours in the day, and you know, by gosh, we have to use all 24. So we're operating at this breakneck pace all the time. And the reason why I like to mention it here is because certainly your time is important, and certainly you got to get to wherever fast, and sometimes it is an emergency and you really want to get there and whatever. I'm just saying, if you're operating like that on that level all the time, think about the concepts of accessibility and approachability, right? You're kind of neither in those moments. When you're all intense and you're walking through camp, you know, you're neither approachable because you look scary and you look like you're right in the middle of something, and you're not even that accessible because you're like zooming by. You don't even look at everybody, you know, you don't have eye contact with anybody because you're trying to get to wherever. So the overall advice that I have for camp folks when it comes to approachability and accessibility, slow down.
That fits something I was reading a little while ago about crowds, and the easiest way for you to cross a busy place is to be looking just where you're going, and all those people will automatically part like the Red Sea in front of you because you're so intensely focused on your goal.
That's right, that's right. So there, you can use it in a more productive way as well, but that's maybe not what we want to do at camp. We don't necessarily want our staff and our kids to part. we want them to engage.
Well, no, yeah, that's what I mean. Is we have to think about that. That's going to be the reaction that they have if you are just focused on a goal and not open to being stopped. Scott, can you tell us about being involved?
Being involved, yes, staying involved. You know, a few years ago I stopped trying as much to use the word sort of teamwork and team play. And one of the reasons is not that I don't like those ideas or I don't, you know, those words aren't good or anything. It's just that I kind of found that we were playing it out a little bit. Like it was starting to fall on deaf ears. Sort of like when you use, you know, no or stop or don't too much with kids. They kind of become sort of numb to those words. They develop word-specific hearing disabilities when it comes to those kinds of words. And I think, you know, as adults we do it too, right? I mean, if we talk too much about team play, it decreases the amount that it kind of stays fresh for us. And so I started using this phrase, stay involved. And I liked it because it was a little bit more directive as far as telling me what to do. What is team play really doing? Well, if I'm talking to a bunch of camp professionals, it means staying involved. It means being on the ground, doing a lot of things. It means creating a culture and creating a feeling in your staff that you would be here doing everything that I'm doing. Now, of course, that's ridiculous. You can't actually do everything that your staff are doing. You may have done every single one of those sort of duties or responsibilities in the past, but that doesn't mean you can do them all now. And frankly, I've seen camp directors try and they fail and they burn out. And they're not being a good leader for everybody. So we've got to maintain this idea of staying involved. And it does mean things like getting on the ground and doing some of the bad jobs sometimes. What those bad jobs are sometimes is obvious, like cleaning the bathroom. Sometimes it's not obvious, and you need to find out from your staff and your camp what those bad jobs are. You know, oftentimes it's creating a subset of responsibilities for yourself that directly tie into your staff's job. You know, again, at my camp, the best example I can think of is that, you know, when there's really extreme behavior or there's really you know, tough homesickness, all my staff know to call me, and they don't, you know. I will hear often, well, we don't want to bug you and all this kind of stuff. They know it's not bugging me. That's the role I like to fulfill at camp. I also, you know, I always try to do a talent show. I always try and, you know, participate in the counselor hunt. I mean, there's things that I do that try to connect their job and what I'm doing. I think those are some of the big ideas as far as staying involved is concerned.
A big part of staying involved and them understanding that you're part of that team also involves communication, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that was sort of the fourth kind of big idea. You know, communication to me really falls into sort of really only two categories. I mean, it's like, how can you be really clear with your expectations, and how can you like listen really carefully? Of course, there's a lot of things that are related to those two sort of core ideas around communication. But I want you to pay attention to exactly what I just said. How can we communicate our expectations clearly? Right? Because when it comes right down to it, there's a lots of different things we need to communicate about. But when it comes to our staff and being a really great leader, oftentimes what it is it's taking our expectations and trying to sort of meter those things out so that people understand. I mean, one time somebody asked me if I were to sort of try to boil down staff training, what would it be? And that's the word I used, expectations. If you really think about what the totality of your staff training is, it's about communicating the expectations. Sometimes it's expectations around what they need to know, or how they need to do a certain thing, or sort of why we're doing something, or whatever it is. But those things are expectations, and a lot of times when you're giving your staff instructions, directions, rules, whatever, it boils down to like, what are the expectations for them right now? So you've got to think very clearly about what those are and then be able to communicate that clearly. Maybe the best strategy or advice I could give anybody about communicating their expectations clearly is writing them down, to know what they are. Write them down. I do a lot of public speaking, and one of the sort of tricks to public speaking is to know your content really well. A lot of folks who do public speaking use notes, use PowerPoint slides, whatever. The best public speakers don't ever look at those notes, don't ever read just off the slide or whatever. And the reason being is that they just know it so well. It's the same thing. One of the reasons why public speakers are so good at it is because they've written that stuff down over and over and over and over again. They've sort of gone through it over and over and over again. Same thing with your expectations. A great sort of strategy for this is, spend 5 minutes a day. I mean, 1 minute a day even, and create a document on your computer, or even go old school and get out a legal pad, and every day for a minute or two or 5, just write down a bunch of your expectations. It does not matter at all what they are about, whether they're about staff to camp interactions, programs, the flow of opening or closing day. I don't really care what they're about. Just start writing them down, because it will help you develop more clarity around what those expectations are. And then the other piece of that communication that I always talk about is listening really carefully. We all know what good, solid, active listening skills are, but I love adding this word about carefully. Because for a couple of reasons. One, carefully sort of assumes that you're taking care of all those active ways to listen. So you really are you're really thinking about looking at this person in the eye and not checking your watch or sort of looking off in one direction or another. You're asking really good follow-up questions or paraphrasing really well, right? You've got to do that carefully. But carefully also assumes that you're going to take the message and sort of, do something with it. Take care of what somebody has told you. It's very powerful and meaningful when you follow up with somebody about a conversation that you had a day ago or 2 days ago, even if it's not quote-unquote important. Right? When that 18-year-old tells you that they're struggling with what they're going to major in, and they're trying to decide between education and English, and 2 days later, you say something like, hey, I was thinking about that, and one of the things that I've noticed is that you're really so good teaching the classes here, that you might want to give education a second look. I mean, you're blah 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 blah. Right? That's so powerful, but you have to take care of what you hear in order to be able to do that. That's I would say not necessarily a natural skill. It's a skill we have to work on. So those are my kind of two big ideas that I always try and talk about when it comes to communication.
But that's great, and I hope sometime we can come back to communication, Scott, because I think that you probably have a lot more ideas of ways that we could be really specific about those two sides of it. But I know we're doing an overview of important stuff, so let's make a note and come back to that. Your fifth leadership area that you wanted to talk about was about delegating, and this is one of those things that I wholeheartedly agree with you. In my very early days as a camp director, felt like I was getting in trouble from a board member who was really upset that I wasn't leading every song at campfire. And I had to sit her down and say, I really don't think my job is to do everything. I think my job is to give it and empower people to do that. That's how I see what it means to be a camp director. And I don't think I ever won her over, but I lasted a lot longer than she did, so I feel better about the way that turned out.
Yeah, for sure. That's exactly it. And that's one of the reasons why I say it exactly like I said. And it's not just delegating; it's delegating real responsibilities. And at camp, we have the pleasure of working in an environment where delegating real responsibilities are things like leading songs at the campfire. Now, to anybody else, that might sound frivolous. But at camp, we know that leading songs in a campfire, managing a meal. These things are big parts of the experience of camp. And some camp directors take things on all themselves. Other camp directors delegate everything out. The idea is great leaders, I think, delegate real responsibility, and that concept of real responsibility, I think, is crucial because it really helps young people create opportunities for development, right? The reality is that yes, you could have somebody just do all the grunt work and the leg work on getting the buses ready to go, make sure you get all the snacks and whatever's going on the bus, or you could delegate them the entire bus list and say, you have to make sure these 100 kids all know how they're getting home the right way. And there's real life consequences to that, because if somebody gets on one bus and they should be on the other bus, someone's going to the wrong place, right? And there's real life consequences to those things and real opportunity for young people to learn. I think that's exactly it. As good leaders, that's what we should be doing. Some of the keys though in delegation are a couple things. One, you as a camp professional have to know yourself well enough to know what you can delegate and what you can't delegate. And sometimes those things aren't necessarily intuitive. Nobody can tell you what you're going to be okay delegating and what you're not delegating. I'll just use myself as an example. 3 or so years ago, I delegated the responsibility for managing all of our meals to our assistant director. And I will tell you that it took me 3 solid years, all the way up through last summer, to really feel okay about letting it go. There I was marching around in the back of the dining hall, all worried about the timing of everything, and dessert's ready, you gotta send them in, and we should be singing songs. It took everything in me not to micromanage every single meal, and in hindsight, had I looked at that, I might have said, delegating the meal might not be the best thing for me to do because I'm so wrapped up in it. Opening and closing day is a good example of something that a lot of camp directors hold tight as far as the control of the organization. Something that I didn't mind delegating at all. I kind of gave those things away, and great, if we want to try it this way, we can do it that way. You want to have the flow go through the school one way versus the other way, I don't really care. The whole point was it was something that was easy for me to delegate. Brings up this idea of micromanaging. When you've given something away, it's gone. It's not yours anymore to do. You certainly are still responsible for the end result, and it is your job to keep the person you delegated it to accountable for the end result. But how they get there is no longer up to you. And I always give this as sort of a general rule to camp directors. The more specific you have to be in delegating the how of a responsibility, the less I think you should actually delegate that responsibility. So if you have to break it down farther and farther and farther about how you want a certain thing done, the more I want you to just keep that one on your list. Just go ahead and run opening campfire, because if you're going to give the unit leaders a minute-by-minute description on what should be going on, you should probably just do it yourself. However, if you can say, hey, I want you guys to run opening campfire, really all that needs to happen is I want you to introduce everybody who, you know, is like not a cabin counselor. I want you to sing some songs. I want every unit to be able to do some cheers. And, you know, I talked to Casey. He wanted to do a skit. Go. I don't care how you do it. Well, then that's probably a good thing for you to be able to delegate. There's still a little bit of the how in there, but you don't need to micromanage it as long as those things get done. So those are some of the ideas sort of wrapped up in delegating real responsibility.
I think there's a lot for people to work on, and certainly things to keep in mind. I am looking forward to coming back to some of these things, as I said, and getting some real good details, some more of your real specific things to work on. But is there anything you wanted to say to wrap up the topic of leadership stuff, Scott?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly it, Travis. There's like a million things that can go into great leadership and leadership development, and there's like a million more things that we could call leadership skills that you may feel like you're really good at, that you want to do more at, some of your signature strengths, or you might feel like, you know, they're challenging for you and you want to work on them more. That's great. I think it starts with that good self-evaluation of knowing where you're at and what you can get better at. This is just my list. These are just 5 things that I sort of pulled out of the air and said, I think these things are important. I want to sort of empower everybody out there to say, hey, you know, there could be a lot more things on your list. I just don't want you to feel overwhelmed, and I thought this would be a good place for all of us to be able to start in thinking to ourselves, how can we be the best leaders that we can be?
That's great. Well, thanks very much, Scott Arizala. It's great to be with you here on your show. For notes on stuff that we talked about here, you can go to camphacker.org and find the listing for Scott's show there, and you'll be able to see just some quick notes from Scott and how to find him. Thanks very much, Scott. And please tell people how they can get a hold of you.
Thanks, Travis. I appreciate it. Yes, if y'all want more information on me and what I do, check me out at thecampcounselor.com. And I really appreciate y'all tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Well, my body